the next article that I wanted to cover, or the next issue I wanted to cover, is regarding Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders' refusal to apologize for opposing war with Iran, which currently the Trump administration is pushing for. And he, at one point, he talked about how, in this video that I'm going to be showing you, he actually posted it on his Twitter page for Senator Bernie Sanders. He talked about how he opposed a lot of different wars, including the Vietnam War and all that stuff. So, let me see here. So let me just read the first part of this article here, and then I'll play you the video that shows where Bernie Sanders made these comments that I'm just talking about. So it says, the title of the article is Sanders, this is from The Hill, by the way. It says, Sanders refuses to apologize for opposing war with Iran. Says Senator Bernie Sanders took aim at calls for him to, quote, apologize for his refusal to support U.S. armed conflicts in the Middle East, saying Friday that he was right about past U.S. wars and would continue to advocate against war with Iran. In a tweet, Sanders wrote that he will apologize to no one, quote, for supporting peaceful diplomatic efforts over armed conflict with Iran, citing U.S. wars in Iraq and Vietnam as examples of past U.S. armed responses that resulted in long-running and exhausting wars. Quote, I was right about Vietnam, I was right about Iraq, I will do everything in my power to prevent a war with Iran. I apologize to no one, the senator tweeted along with a video explaining his stance against war with the country. So let me just play that clip for you. It's from his Twitter account here, so it's about 1:40. Check it out.
Recently, I've been criticized a bit because of my opposition to war and my belief that we got to do everything possible to solve international conflict without going to war. So let me be very clear. I make no apologies to anybody. That when I was a young man, before I was elected to anything, I opposed the war in Vietnam. And I know what that war did to my generation. And when I was a member of the House, I helped lead the effort against the war in Iraq because I knew that Cheney and Bush and these other folks were lying about weapons of mass destruction.
I'm opposed to giving the president a blank check to launch a unilateral invasion and occupation of Iraq, and why I will vote against this resolution.
And that war and that vote was the worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of the United States. And as a senator, I'm proud that I helped for the first time in 45 years to utilize the War Powers Act to get the United States out of an unauthorized war in Yemen. Unfortunately, after passing in the House and the Senate, Trump vetoed that legislation. And I'll tell you something, that right now, I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent a war with Iran. Because if you think that the war in Iraq was a disaster, my guess is that the war in Iran would be even worse. So let's work together and prevent that war. If people want to criticize me for that, go for it, that's okay. I don't apologize to anybody. Thank you.
So that's a great video. I'm glad to see Bernie coming out for that anti-war position. He has largely stood against certain wars. Like I said, like he said there, he was against the Vietnam War. He was against the war in Iraq. He did not mention Afghanistan. He did not mention Libya. He did not mention Syria. He did mention Yemen, which is very good, because the war in Yemen was definitely a big deal. So he used the War Powers Act to declare the war in Yemen as unconstitutional. Trump vetoed that, but that's expected. That nobody's surprised by that. But when it comes to the things that he has pushed for, though, those are all great things that he advocated for, and he is on record advocating for that, and that's, he should, that should be appreciated. Now, like I said, he didn't mention certain kind of wars. So obviously we're in 7, 8 different wars now. If you add Niger to that as well, but I don't remember. So like I would say the three wars that he's spoken out against the most, Vietnam, I mean obviously that's a past war. So, but that's as far as the wars that are currently happening right now, we're bombing 8 different countries right now. We're bombing. Hopefully I can name them. We're bombing Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, and Niger. That's 8 wars that Donald Trump is involved in. President Obama was involved in 7 of them. Trump added Niger onto that list. And apparently there's other like shadow wars that we're involved in as well. So, but as far as the ones that are that we know about, 8 of them are the ones that we know about. And so obviously adding Iran to that list would be horrible. As somebody who is Iranian American, and I have, my ancestors are from Iran. My parents were both born in Iran. It's a big deal if Iran were to be invaded and overthrown, just like Iraq. Iraq was, Afghanistan, well, not so much Afghanistan, but certainly Iraq was. But yeah, just in general, all these like unconstitutional wars are just ridiculous, because especially when it came to Iraq and Afghanistan, those were all under the AUMF. Well, AUMF was under Afghanistan for the Afghanistan war, and then the Patriot Act and all that stuff. So, like when you factor in all these different kind of things that were these kind of wars that were pushed for, they were all basically done under the umbrella of just one, kind of specific declaration, which in this case, which in the case of, started under Bush. So that started with the AUMF. And just for those of you that don't know, the AUMF stands for, hold on, I forgot what AUMF specifically, but that's the euphemism for it is Authorization for Use of Military Force against Iraq. So I'm sorry. So the AUMF was actually for Iraq. So it was not for Afghanistan. That's my mistake. Sorry. So that was the AUMF was the authorization for Iraq. There was another use of military force authorization that was in 1991. So that was for the Gulf War that was waged by George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush. And then there's another authorization that was used against the government of Syria to respond to the chemical weapons attack, which recently news came out that the so-called chemical attacks in Syria, apparently done at the hands of Bashar al-Assad, have been disputed. And so, a lot of the establishment obviously is pushing for doing even more in Syria, as if we're not doing enough as it is. Syria's a fucking mess right now, but they're constantly pushing for that to get expanded even more. I have not heard Bernie Sanders say much about Syria, especially when it comes to advocating against that, because he's in favor of overthrowing Bashar Assad. He hasn't said very much, to my knowledge, about Libya. So again, he mentioned Yemen in this video. It was good that he was able to, to prevent that, or at least push for that. Obviously, we're still in Yemen, so it's obviously more of a symbolic thing. So, but still, that still puts Bernie on the record as being against that war. But, like I said, there's certain wars that he hasn't mentioned. He seems to be in support of the Afghanistan war. Iraq he was against. Iran he's against. But as far as current wars, I mean, he still seems to be in favor of a majority of them. So Bernie needs to speak out against more of these wars, because at the end of the day, you can't just pick and choose. If you're anti-interventionism, you have to be against it, And a lot of these wars were in a lot of these countries for no reason. I mean, when you consider places like somewhere like Afghanistan, I mean, we have troops in Afghanistan that are protecting poppy fields. There's a lot of opium, obviously, that's it's made, and so it's grown and made and everything in Afghanistan, and we actually have troops in Afghanistan that are protecting those poppy fields in certain parts in that certain part of Afghanistan. And so I mean that should say a lot about what our interests are, and it's all, as usual, it's all financial. It just has to do with what our financial interests are. So when it comes to all these, different wars that we're in, it's not all financial. In the case of Afghanistan, it's definitely financial, but it's just about just having power in general and just being the world police and telling everybody what to do, but having control over them and being able to control what decisions they'd make and everything. That's what the America's trying to do with Iran too. So when it comes to under Trump, certainly it was happening a lot under Bush, but Bush ultimately didn't get it done. But under Trump, for sure, I mean, I'm very worried about what he's going to be doing regarding Iran, and hopefully Bernie Sanders and a couple of other senators and congressmen can advocate, can do something to keep Trump from doing that, because obviously at this point, when it came to what Bush did regarding the UMF and the Patriot Act and everything, like all the stuff that is happening, the power that Bush gave to the executive branch, especially the president, is he allowed all the other presidents going after him, succeeding him to do the same exact things he did. So, after Trump, Obama got to, continue all the wars. In fact, expand the wars. He went from 2 wars, which was Iraq and Afghanistan, to 7 wars, which added Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan on the list. And then Trump added an 8th war with with Niger. So it just piles up. It's a snowball. It's a snowball effect of the establishment and these, presidents that are in power, that love power. They just want to keep adding more and more to the credit card, And it's not so much a money thing. Of course, money is a big deal, but you also have to consider lives. You got to consider human lives and the lives that are being destroyed in all these different countries where people, they didn't do anything wrong, but they're all getting killed. They're all getting slaughtered. People in Yemen and stuff. I mean, how many people? At least 200,000 minimum people died in Afghanistan, in Iraq. I hear it's up to 1 million. And considering the fact that the involvement that Saudi Arabia has when it comes to what they're doing in Yemen, let alone the United States. Saudi Arabia is also involved in what's going on in Yemen, and they're doing a lot to, destroy the lives of people in a country like Yemen, let alone they're definitely pushing for a war with Iran, because Israel also wants that too. So Israel and Saudi Arabia are kind of in coalition to push for a war with Iran, and putting it on the U.S. credit card, basically trying to get the U.S. to do it all for them. But when it comes to Yemen, for Yemen, for example, I mean, like there's situations where there are weddings being bombed in Yemen. There's school buses full of kids that are being bombed. At one point, I think it was last year, the big story that got everybody's attention, even the so-called resistance that is supposedly resisting Donald Trump. All of a sudden, they started caring about what was going on in Yemen because of the fact that 40 children were killed in a school bus in Yemen, and it was bombed by, I believe, Saudi Arabian, bombs essentially, and everybody got an uproar from that, even though they should have happened a lot earlier. A lot earlier, these things were happening, and people weren't focusing on it. Finally, it took them, something, obviously that the fact that it involved children got them to focus on it. So. Yeah, but I mean that's obviously again what Bernie Sanders is standing for is very good, but I just feel like he needs to stand up for a lot more of these unconstitutional wars, and I think he needs to stop picking and choosing. But he's only doing that because he doesn't want to find a way to criticize the Democrats, because he feels that if he criticizes the Democrats too much, who are advocating for all these different wars, then he's going to get in trouble, and then he's going to be called not a real Democrat and all this stuff. So, he's being kind of careful in that regard, and I don't like that. But again, like many issues with Bernie, I understand why he's doing it. I just don't particularly care for it. So let me just read little bit more of this article here. It says from The Hill. It says, recently it's quoting him again. So this is from the video, just in case you guys didn't hear it. He says, recently I've been criticized a bit because of my opposition to war, he says in the video. So let me be very clear. I make no apologies to anybody that when I was a young man, before I was elected to anything, I opposed the war in Vietnam, and I know what that war did to my generation. I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent a war with Iran, because if you think the war in Iraq was a disaster, my guess is that war in Iran would be even worse. By the way, it would be nice if Bernie would also talk against the war in Venezuela too, because that's an issue that is obviously in the news a lot. The United States is trying to administer a coup, or at least they're in the kind of in the process of administering a coup in Venezuela, and they're trying to overthrow Maduro. And Nicolas Maduro was democratically elected by Venezuela. Now, whatever problems that you want to take with the way that government is run, maybe I don't know a lot about what's going on in Venezuela. I don't know a lot about Nicolas Maduro, but I do know that he was democratically elected. Did he do some things that which involved killing his own people? I mean, I think I've heard about that. I don't know the details of it. I'm talking to you right now. I'll have to do a little bit more research on the specifics there. But when somebody's democratically elected, you can't just go in there and overthrow them. Imagine if somebody did that to the United States. Supposedly, I mean, if you want to take the Electoral College as a democratic form of voting somebody into office, Donald Trump was democratically elected. Now, obviously, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Okay, so Hillary Clinton was president. Either way, imagine if one of those people were president and somebody tried to overthrow us because they felt like it. Obviously, that'd be crazy. We would be, we would be against that, because you don't want to get your country overthrown. Even if you don't agree with that president, having your country overthrown is just going to create madness. It's going to create a ton of fucking problems for that country, which is why I'm very afraid about what might happen with Iran and their government stuff. As fucked up as their government is in Iran, there's a lot to worry about regarding the overthrowing of that government, and then what's going to happen after that, like what's happened to Iraq and Afghanistan, all those other countries that have been made worse because of what America has done to it. So when it comes to Maduro, though, I mean, like, Bernie hasn't talked a lot about Venezuela. A lot of all these neocons and shit, and John Bolton and everybody, the people that are pushing for war, for all these different wars, whether it's Iran, Venezuela, in some cases North Korea even, I think. North Korea not as much, but even China, I mean, not so much a war with China. We're in a trade war with China, that's for sure. The war, I don't think is going to be happening with China. But as far as a trade war, that's another problem. That's another topic for another day. But a lot of these neocons that are pushing for these wars, they, especially when it comes in the case of Venezuela, they're talking about how Juan Guaido is the interim president now, because the United States has declared that Maduro is a dictator and he's been ousted or whatever, and that's not even really true. They're just declaring that so the United States can declare victory, just like they did with Iraq when President Bush was on that. He was on that plane carrier, I think it was. It was like he was on like one of those carriers, and he was sitting there, and, he was standing there. He had the mission accomplished sign above him. People were in the stands, they were clapping and stuff, all these different soldiers and stuff. This is kind of like, it's just another attempt by the United States to, try and declare these things as a victory, because they want to have power again. Like I said before, when it comes to all these different wars that we're involved in, we just want to have power over everybody. And now we want to have power over Iran. Now we want to have power over Venezuela. Now we want to have power over whatever, North Korea, maybe China. Obviously, again, China's not going to happen because we're in debt to China. So that's not going to happen. But any kind of war is considered a war. Russia, I mean, with all this Russiagate stuff, America they've been threatening Russia in many cases too. Aside from what anybody wants to claim about Trump being Putin's puppet and all this stuff, we're involved in a lot of shit with Russia too, especially since the fact that we're arming Ukrainian rebels. Who apparently a lot of them are neo-Nazis, from what I've heard, but we're arming Ukrainian rebels to fight against Russia. That's even something President Obama didn't want to do, but Trump is doing that. He's happy to do that, and nobody's saying shit. All these anti-Trump people are not saying shit about Trump arming Ukrainian rebels who are neo-Nazis, and they're not talking about how Obama didn't want to do it, but Trump's doing it. So was Obama Putin's puppet too because he didn't want to arm Ukrainian rebels? So. Yeah. Anyway, the rest of the article here talks about how. So let me read this here. It says the comments come as tensions rise between the U.S. and Iran, with the State Department pulling most U.S. personnel from Iraq amid reports that the Pentagon presented a plan to deploy 120,000 troops to the region. Which Trump dismissed. The back and forth has prompted many to point to Iraq as a warning sign for consequences of war with Iran. Sanders was questioned on NBC's Meet the Press over the weekend about his past opposition to the Vietnam War. One tweet from the Meet the Press Twitter account, declared that Sanders, quote, said he won't apologize and for his anti-war efforts. The tweet was widely shared online, with Sanders supporters questioning why Sanders would apologize for a stance they argue has been historically vindicated. So one person, David Cabe, who I believe writes for Jacobin, which is a far-left magazine, it says, Meet the Press should apologize for its role in selling the lies that brought us the Iraq War and for this. Another person says, why would he apologize for being right? And then the final part of the paragraph in this article says, Sanders, who is running for president in 2020, currently sits in second place in most polls of early primary states behind former Vice President Joe Biden, but ahead of a large pack of rival Democrats that has swelled to more than 20 contenders in total. So yeah, when it comes to this issue, I mean, it's great that Bernie Sanders advocates, against these obviously horrible wars. I'm glad that he puts out the videos. I'm glad that he says he's not going to apologize. That's really, really good. Hopefully he continues on with that. He needs to stand tall. He needs to stand strong. He can't let the mainstream media, he can't let Trump, all his neocons, he can't let them gain any kind of advantage. They can't let them bully him. Along with him, Tulsi Gabbard and Mike Gravel, as far as the people that are running, those are the only people that are really advocating against any kind of wars. Everybody else is just being they're being a show for doing what the establishment wants. So, we'll see what happens. A lot of times when it comes to these wars, a lot of it is just kind of like a waiting game. You got to see where it goes. You got to see, hopefully it's not going to happen, and then hopefully it's going to be prevented by something. Is somebody going to get involved? So another country, are they going to get involved to prevent it? In this, in the case of Iran, they're allies with Syria. They are allies with Russia. In some regard, they're allies with China. So obviously they're allies with like Lebanon and stuff. So, but like Iran has its decent amount of allies, but they have so much going against them, and they have so much firepower against them, and a lot of that firepower is countries that are aligned with the United States. So when you consider the United States, you consider Saudi Arabia, and you consider Israel. Those three countries combined, make up for whatever support Iran has from Syria and maybe Russia. But I mean, I don't think Russia's not really involved in, they don't really care about the betterment of Iran or its citizens. But the only reason they would be supporting Iran would be to be against whatever the United States is doing. So I don't really trust their efforts are, I don't think it's really in favor. Again, I don't think it's in favor of Iran. I don't think it's in favor of the people. So I can't really trust what Putin or Russia is going to do regarding that issue. So we'll see where we'll kind of just disregard that, but we'll see what happens. We'll see, hopefully no progress is made on this front regarding Iran, regarding Venezuela, and, hopefully Trump's efforts can fail just as much as, just like George Bush's did.